Ethan Parker had always been the golden child in the Parker family. Born in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Denver, Colorado, he was raised in a household that believed in tradition and stability. His father, Richard Parker, was a successful accountant who had never missed a day of work in his life. His mother, Susan Parker, was a dedicated teacher who expected her children to strive for academic excellence. Growing up, Ethan's world was defined by two things: structure and expectations. From an early age, Ethan was taught that a college degree was not just an option, it was the only path to a fulfilling and respectable life. His older brother, Nathan, had followed that path flawlessly, graduating from an Ivy League school and landing a lucrative job in New York. His younger sister, Emily, was well on her way to earning a spot at a top-tier university. The Parker family dinners were always filled with discussions about grades, internships, and future plans. And in the middle of it all, Ethan sat quietly, nodding along while feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. In high school, Ethan did well enough to get into the University of Colorado Boulder. But despite his decent grades and his family's constant encouragement, he never felt like he fit into the mold they had carefully constructed for him. He found lectures uninspiring, group projects exhausting, and the constant pressure to excel suffocating. While his friends and classmates seemed to thrive in this environment, Ethan spent more time staring out the window, dreaming of something different, something that wasn't defined by grades or career ladders. His passion was photography. Ever since he was a kid, Ethan had been captivated by the power of an image, the way a single photo could tell an entire story without a single word. He'd spend hours wandering through the city with his second-hand Nikon, capturing the lives of strangers, the dance of light on pavement, and the quiet beauty of forgotten places. But to his family, photography was nothing more than a hobby, a frivolous distraction from the real work of building a future. As he entered his sophomore year, Ethan felt more disconnected than ever. His roommate, Tyler, was majoring in finance and seemed to be living the life his family wanted for him: internship interviews, networking events, and endless study sessions. Meanwhile, Ethan spent his nights developing film in the tiny dorm bathroom he'd converted into a darkroom, lost in the magic of shadows and light. One evening in early October, Ethan sat alone in his dorm room, scrolling through an endless stream of job postings that didn't interest him. The glow of the computer screen made his eyes ache, but he forced himself to keep looking, anything to avoid the nagging voice in his head that said he didn't belong here. Just as he was about to close his laptop, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his mom. "How's studying going? Remember, every grade counts." Ethan sighed, typing back a quick "good, thanks" before setting the phone face down on his desk. But that night, something shifted. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's life, ticking boxes on a checklist he hadn't written. He lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time, he admitted to himself he didn't want to be in college anymore. He wanted to be out in the world, camera in hand, capturing life as it unfolded around him. The next morning, he woke up with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in months. He skipped his morning lecture and instead took a long walk through downtown Denver, weaving through the early morning crowds. He snapped photos of street musicians, of a homeless man sleeping on a park bench, of a little girl chasing pigeons across the square. Each click of the shutter felt like a tiny rebellion, proof that he was still alive, still searching for something that made his heart race. That afternoon, he called his parents. They answered on speakerphone, their voices warm and expectant. "Hi, honey," his mother chirped. "How's your week going?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." There was a pause, the kind that only comes when someone senses a storm brewing. "I've been thinking a lot lately, and I've decided to drop out of college." The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan could almost hear his father's jaw clench, his mother's hand flutter to her chest. "Ethan," Richard finally said, his voice tight, "you can't be serious. You have everything you need right in front of you. A degree is your ticket to a good life." Susan's voice trembled. "We just want what's best for you. You're so close to finishing. Don't throw it all away for a silly hobby." "It's not a hobby. Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. Photography is what I love. It's what makes me feel alive. I can't keep pretending I care about grades and lectures when all I want is to be out there, telling stories with my camera. But his parents couldn't understand. The call ended with tears and raised voices, and Ethan knew that nothing would ever be the same between them. When he hung up, he sat in the quiet dorm room, heart pounding, hands shaking. It felt like he had stepped off a cliff with no idea where he would land. But in that terrifying freefall, he felt a glimmer of freedom, like he was finally living life on his own terms. As he packed his few belongings into a duffel bag that night, Ethan felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't stay in a place that made him feel so small. Before he turned off the light and walked out the door, he paused for a moment, looking back at the dorm room that had been his prison for the last 2 years. In the hallway, he passed a poster advertising a photography exhibition at a small gallery downtown. Something about it caught his eye, a bold red font that read, "See the world through a different lens." Ethan smiled to himself. It felt like a sign, a whisper from the universe telling him he was on the right path. Little did he know this decision would change everything. The world he was about to enter was full of challenges he couldn't yet imagine, but also full of possibilities he'd never dared to dream. The day after Ethan left his dorm room for good, he boarded a bus bound for Los Angeles. It was a 20-hour ride across the desert, through the snow-capped mountains, and past countless small towns where life moved at a slower pace. As he watched the landscape blur past the window, he felt a strange mix of terror and excitement. He was leaving behind everything he'd ever known, his family, his friends, the carefully mapped-out life he'd always been expected to follow. But in that uncertainty, there was also a spark of possibility that he couldn't ignore. Ethan arrived in Los Angeles just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The city pulsed with energy, cars honked, neon signs flickered to life, and people from every corner of the world bustled along the sidewalks. He stepped off the bus, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and took a deep breath of the salty air. It felt like a fresh start. His first few nights in LA were spent in a dingy hostel downtown, sharing a cramped room with 3 other young dreamers. There was Javier, a musician from Mexico who played his guitar until dawn, Zoe, a dancer from New York who moved like liquid light, and Marcus, a writer from Chicago with ink-stained fingers and a haunted look in his eyes. They all carried their own hopes and heartbreaks, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he was surrounded by kindred spirits. Every morning, he woke up early and wandered the streets with his camera, chasing the perfect shot. He roamed through the alleys of Chinatown, captured the sun-baked graffiti of Venice Beach, and spent hours photographing the faces of street performers and strangers lost in thought. His photos weren't perfect, some were blurry, some too dark, but they were real. They felt alive in a way that his college essays never had. But the romance of it all quickly gave way to the reality of survival. His savings were dwindling fast, and each day, the city seemed to test his resolve a little more. He picked up odd jobs wherever he could, washing dishes in a greasy diner on Sunset Boulevard, unloading boxes at a warehouse near the port, even posing as a statue for tips in the tourist district. It was exhausting, but every dollar he earned bought him another day to chase his dream. One afternoon, as he was shooting photos in Griffith Park, he struck up a conversation with an older photographer named Victor. Victor was grizzled and sunburned, with a battered camera bag that looked like it had seen 1,000 miles of road. But his eyes were sharp and kind, and he saw something in Ethan's raw, unpolished photos that made him pause. "You've got a good eye," Victor said, flipping through the shots on Ethan's camera. "You're not just taking pictures, you're telling stories. That's rare." Ethan's heart raced. "Thanks," he said softly, his voice cracking. "I'm still learning." Victor gave a half-smile. "Aren't we all? Listen, kid. If you're serious about this, you need to find your own voice. Forget what everyone else says. Find the stories only you can see. That's how you make people feel something." They talked for hours, sitting on a park bench as the sun dipped below the horizon. Victor shared stories of his own journey, of the years he spent sleeping in his car, of the gallery shows that fell through, and of the one photo that changed everything for him. When they finally parted ways, Victor handed Ethan a battered business card. "Come by the studio sometime," he said. "I've got some gear you can borrow, and I'll introduce you to a few people." Ethan held onto that card like a lifeline. In the days that followed, he took Victor's advice to heart. He stopped trying to imitate the polished shots he saw online and instead focused on the moments that moved him: an elderly woman feeding pigeons in Pershing Square, a teenage skateboarder catching air against the backdrop of the city, a couple arguing under the neon glow of a diner sign. Slowly, his photos began to change. They weren't perfect, but they were honest, and that honesty felt like freedom. Yet, the challenges didn't stop. One evening, after a long shift at the diner, Ethan returned to the hostel to find that his duffel bag had been stolen. All his clothes, his few personal belongings, gone in an instant. He sat on the curb outside the hostel, numb and exhausted, wondering if he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. It was then that Zoe, the dancer, found him. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down beside him and offered him half of her sandwich. They ate in silence, the sounds of the city washing over them like a lullaby. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sure. "Ethan," she said, "you're here because you're brave enough to chase what you love. That's rare. Don't let this break you." Her words were a balm on his bruised spirit. The next morning, Zoe helped him find a thrift store where he bought a few clothes with what little money he had left. Marcus loaned him a worn-out sleeping bag, and Javier taught him how to busk with his camera, offering quick street portraits for $5 a pop. It wasn't much, but it kept him going. Ethan realized that he was part of a makeshift family now, one bound not by blood, but by shared dreams and the determination to keep going no matter how hard it got. They looked out for each other, sharing meals, tips, and laughter late into the night. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Late one evening, as he wandered through the city with his camera, he stumbled upon a protest in front of City Hall. The air was electric with chants and homemade signs, the crowd alive with anger and hope. Ethan raised his camera and began to shoot, capturing the fierce determination in the protesters' faces. The police lined up in silent rows, the flickering glow of candles in the darkness. In that moment, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, like his photos could bear witness to a truth bigger than himself. When he finally returned to the hostel, tired and exhilarated, he found a message from Victor waiting for him. It was a simple text: "Your shots from tonight. Send them my way. I know someone who might be interested." Ethan's hands trembled as he typed out a reply. This was what he'd come here for: to find his voice, to tell stories that moved people. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Ethan woke up the next morning to the bright sun streaming through the thin curtains of the hostel. Despite the restless night and the weight of everything he'd lost, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was done waiting for things to happen to him. He was ready to make them happen. He sent Victor the shots from the protest, fingers trembling as he hit send. It felt like he was laying bare a piece of his soul. Victor responded almost immediately. "These are powerful. I'm sending them to a friend at a local magazine. Keep your phone close." Ethan spent the rest of the day pacing the cracked sidewalks of the city, his camera a comforting weight around his neck. Every corner of Los Angeles seemed alive with possibility. A busker playing the violin in the subway, a muralist painting a wall with colors so vivid they hurt his eyes, a street preacher shouting about salvation in a voice that cracked the air. Ethan snapped photo after photo, losing himself in the rhythm of the streets. By late afternoon, his phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. "Ethan? This is Sarah from West Side Magazine. Victor shared your protest photos. Would you be interested in doing a feature for us?" He nearly dropped the phone. His voice caught as he stammered out, "Yes. Of course. I'd love to." Sarah gave him a quick rundown. They wanted a photo essay capturing the voices of the city, portraits, street scenes, the raw energy of LA. A freelance gig but paid. Real money. Real opportunity. Ethan felt like his lungs were full of light. He didn't waste a moment. Over the next few days, he threw himself into the project with everything he had. He wandered the alleys of Skid Row, talking to those who lived on the margins, their voices rough with pain and pride. He photographed a mother and her child sitting on the steps of a mission shelter, their eyes bright with stubborn hope. He captured the graffiti artists of Boyle Heights, their murals a silent rebellion against erasure. In the evenings, he returned to the hostel, exhausted but alive. His friends cheered him on, Zoe twirling around the room in celebration, Marcus tapping out poems inspired by Ethan's photos, Javier playing a melody that seemed to echo the city itself. Ethan began to see the city through a different lens. It wasn't just a place of bright lights and broken dreams. It was a canvas, alive with stories waiting to be told. He realized that photography wasn't just about capturing what was in front of him. It was about revealing what lay beneath the surface, the unseen truths hidden in plain sight. One evening, as he sat on the fire escape with his camera balanced on his knee, Zoe joined him. Her hair was tied up, sweat glistening on her brow from a day of dancing in the studio. She looked at him with a half-smile. "You're changing," she said softly. Ethan blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're not just taking pictures anymore," she said. "You're seeing people. You're telling their stories. That's what makes you an artist, Ethan." He didn't know how to respond, but her words burrowed deep in his chest, warm and frightening all at once. The day his photos were published in West Side magazine, Ethan bought 5 copies and spread them out on the hostel floor. There, in crisp print, were his images: the fierce-eyed activist at the protest, the old man playing jazz on a battered saxophone, the mural of a phoenix rising from ashes. He ran his fingers over the pages, his name in bold type beneath the images. For a moment, he just stared, letting it sink in. When he showed the magazine to Victor, the older photographer clapped him on the back with a grin. "Told you," Victor said. "Your voice matters, kid. Now go out there and make sure people hear it." The next few weeks were a blur. Ethan started getting small gigs: a wedding shoot in Echo Park, headshots for a struggling actor friend, a product shoot for a local vegan cafe. Each job was a new challenge, a new way to push himself. The money wasn't great, but it was enough to keep him afloat, and more importantly, it felt like he was finally living on his own terms. But even as he began to build his portfolio, the city never stopped testing him. One night, after finishing a gig, he took a shortcut through an alley and was jumped by 2 men who stole his camera. He stumbled back to the hostel with blood on his lip and nothing but a broken memory of what he'd lost. Zoe and Javier patched him up, their hands gentle and their words fierce. "You're not giving up," Javier said. "You're just getting started." The next morning, Ethan went to Victor, explaining what happened. Victor listened quietly, then reached under the counter of his cluttered studio and pulled out an old Nikon. "It's not new," Victor said, handing it over. "But it's got heart, just like you." Ethan cradled the camera in his hands. It wasn't just a tool, it was a second chance. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's name started to circle through small creative circles. Word of mouth in coffee shops, late-night calls from friends of friends. He was still sleeping on a thin mattress in a cramped hostel room, still eating cheap takeout, and hustling for every dollar, but it didn't matter. He was doing what he loved, and that was worth more than comfort ever could be. One afternoon, he was invited to a small gallery show at a converted warehouse downtown. It was the first time his work would hang on a wall, framed and lit for people to see. Zoe and Marcus came with him, their eyes bright with excitement. He wore his one clean shirt, palms slick with sweat, his heart hammering in his chest. As he watched strangers linger in front of his photos, listening to them murmur and point, he felt something shift inside him. All the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd made a mistake, all the times he'd almost given up, it was worth it for this. For this moment where his story was part of something bigger. When the night ended and the lights dimmed, Zoe squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You're making people see the world the way you do." And for the first time, Ethan believed it too. The gallery show had felt like a triumph, a moment of light after so much darkness. But life, Ethan was learning, didn't move in a straight line. It twisted and buckled, and sometimes it broke. A week after the show, Ethan's phone buzzed with a call from his sister, Emily. She was crying. He could hear it in her voice even before she spoke. "Dad's in the hospital," she choked out. "It's bad, Ethan. They're not sure he's going to make it." For a moment, Ethan felt like the world had tilted under his feet. He hadn't spoken to his father in months, not since he'd left the family's tight circle to chase something that felt real. But now, the anger and the hurt seemed small in the face of what might be lost. He took the first bus back to San Diego, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his camera tucked away but forgotten. The journey was a blur of neon signs and dark highways, his mind spinning with what-ifs and old memories. He hadn't been back home in almost a year. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale air. Emily was waiting for him in the corridor, her eyes red-rimmed. She pulled him into a hug so tight, he could barely breathe. "He's stable for now," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But they don't know if he'll wake up." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. He pushed open the door to his father's room, the beeping of the monitors loud in the hush of the night. His father looked smaller than he remembered, tubes snaking from his arms, his face pale and drawn. He sat by the bed, fingers wrapped around the cold metal of the chair. He thought about the last time they'd spoken, the harsh words thrown like knives, the slammed door. He wanted to tell his father that he was sorry, that he understood now why he'd been so angry, so disappointed. But the words stuck in his throat, too heavy to lift. He stayed the night, dozing in the hard plastic chair, jolting awake every time a nurse came in. In the quiet moments, he found himself praying, something he hadn't done in years. Praying for a second chance, for one more day to make things right. When the morning came, his father was still unconscious. Emily insisted he go home to shower and eat, promising she'd call if anything changed. Ethan stepped outside into the cold morning light, the weight of it all pressing on his shoulders. He took the long walk back to their old house, the one he'd grown up in. It looked the same, peeling paint on the porch, the mailbox still leaning to one side. But inside, it felt hollow. The pictures on the walls were like ghosts of another life, birthdays and holidays, smiles that felt 1,000 years old. He stood in his childhood room, staring at the posters of baseball players and band logos he'd taped to the walls. It felt like he was standing in a stranger's life, like he'd stepped into a memory he couldn't quite touch. When he got back to the hospital that evening, his father was awake. His eyes were open but unfocused, and when Ethan spoke to him, he just stared, his mouth working around words that wouldn't come. It was like watching a piece of him slip away, and there was nothing Ethan could do to stop it. In the days that followed, Ethan fell into a kind of half-life. He slept in the hospital waiting room, his camera gathering dust in the hostel back in LA. He didn't know how to go back to that world, how to keep chasing his dreams when his family needed him here. Emily was a rock, holding everything together with a kind of quiet strength that made him ache with guilt. She'd always been the peacemaker, the one who held the family close while he'd run away. Now he felt like he was seeing her for the first time. One night, as he sat with her in the cafeteria, she reached across the table and took his hand. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "Dad wouldn't want you to give up your life for him. He'd want you to keep going." Ethan shook his head. "I can't just leave."
"Not now."
"But you can't stay here forever," she said, her voice gentle. "You've built something for yourself, Ethan. Don't let it slip away." He didn't have an answer. He felt torn in two, between the life he'd built and the family he'd left behind. Between the boy who'd run away and the man who was finally starting to find his place in the world. Days turned into a week, and slowly, his father began to recover. The words came back in fits and starts, his smile returning in small, hard-won moments. One morning, as Ethan sat by the bed, his father reached out and took his hand. "I'm proud of you," he rasped. "I know I didn't say it before.
But I see you now, Ethan."
I see the man you're becoming." It was like a dam breaking inside him. Ethan bowed his head, tears slipping down his cheeks. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. When he finally returned to LA, it was with a new sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what mattered. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't waste another day. The city was waiting for him, the streets alive with light and possibility. He picked up his camera, the one Victor had given him, and stepped back into the world. The shadows were still there, but so was the light, and he was ready to capture both. Ethan's return to Los Angeles was like waking from a long, heavy sleep. He felt raw, scraped clean by everything he'd faced back home, his father's illness, the weight of old resentments, the chance for forgiveness that he hadn't known he needed so badly. He stepped back into his small apartment with a sense of reverence, like a pilgrim returning to a sacred space. The walls, once bare and sterile, were now alive with his photographs, images of light and shadow, hope and heartbreak, each one a testament to his journey. But more than that, he carried something new inside him, a quiet certainty that he could no longer run from the truth of who he was or what he wanted. He started to shoot again, his camera like an extension of his soul. He roamed the city in the blue hours before dawn, capturing the glow of neon signs and the hush of empty streets. He photographed lovers tangled in laughter in the parks, the old men playing chess in the square, the musicians busking on the corners with battered guitars. Each frame was a prayer, a promise to himself that he wouldn't waste this chance. The calls started coming in slowly at first, small jobs, weddings, local events. Ethan poured himself into each project, refusing to let his standards slip, even when the pay was meager and the hours were long. He worked tirelessly, editing late into the night, his fingers numb and his eyes bloodshot. Victor was there, always a phone call away. "You're doing good work, kid," he'd say, his voice warm with pride. "But don't forget to rest. Even the best of us burn out if we don't pause." Ethan would smile and promise to sleep, though they both knew he wouldn't. Not yet. There was too much to prove, too much to capture. One evening, as he walked back from a shoot, he got a call that would change everything. It was from a woman named Lisa Torres, a gallery curator who'd seen his work at Victor's show. Her voice was smooth and confident. "Ethan, I've been following your work," she said. "I think you have something special. Would you be interested in a solo exhibition?" He almost dropped his phone. A solo exhibition. His own name on the walls. "I'd be honored," he managed, his heart thundering in his chest. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation, selecting images, framing prints, negotiating contracts. Lisa had a way of pushing him to see his work in a new light, to dig deeper into the stories he wanted to tell. "People want to see your truth," she told him one afternoon, her eyes bright with excitement. "They want to feel what you feel. Don't hold back." He took her words to heart. The night of the exhibition was electric. The gallery was a sea of light and murmured voices, the walls hung with Ethan's images. Friends and strangers mingled, glasses of wine in hand, pausing in front of his work with quiet reverence. Ethan moved through the crowd like a ghost, his heart in his throat. He watched as people lingered over the photos of the city he loved, the man sleeping on the bus stop bench, the child playing in a fountain, the woman with tears in her eyes as she clutched a bouquet of wilted flowers. Each image was a piece of his heart, laid bare for the world to see. Victor was there, his smile proud and a little wistful. He pulled Ethan into a hug, clapping him on the back. "I told you," he said softly. "I told you your story was worth telling." The praise came in waves. People who'd never met him spoke of how his images moved them, how they saw themselves in the faces of his subjects. Ethan tried to take it all in, to let the words sink into the quiet spaces of his soul. But it wasn't until later, when the crowd had thinned and the music had faded, that he truly let himself feel it. He stood alone in the center of the gallery, the echoes of the night still ringing in his ears. And for the first time, he let himself believe, really believe, that he had something to offer the world. The days after the exhibition were a whirlwind. His phone rang with new opportunities, commissions, collaborations, interviews. His email was flooded with messages from people who'd seen his work and wanted more. It was everything he'd dreamed of, and yet, it felt strangely calm inside him. Like he'd been walking a tightrope for years, and had finally found his balance. One afternoon, as he walked through the city with his camera, he paused to watch the sunlight glint off the glass towers downtown. The world felt brighter, sharper, as if he was seeing it for the first time. He thought of his father, still recovering back in San Diego, and the words he'd spoken in that hospital room. "I see the man you're becoming." Ethan carried those words like a talisman, a promise to keep going. He didn't know what the future would bring, he didn't need to. All he knew was that he would keep chasing the light, keep telling the stories that needed to be told. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time, he felt ready. He raised his camera, the city spread out before him like a canvas, and he pressed the shutter. The click of the camera was like a heartbeat, steady and sure. In the months that followed the exhibition, Ethan's life became a tapestry of new opportunities and deep reflection. He found himself traveling, first to New York, where he shot a series on the quiet poetry of the city's subway tunnels, then to Chicago, where he captured the windswept beauty of the lakeside and the echoes of jazz that lingered in the alleys. Each trip was a lesson, each photograph a piece of his growing vision. But no matter where he went, he carried with him the stillness he'd found in San Diego. It had become a part of him, woven into the way he saw the world. One late autumn morning, as the leaves turned gold and crimson in the streets of Los Angeles, Ethan returned home from a trip. He stepped into his apartment, weary but grateful, and looked around at the prints and canvases that now filled every wall. It felt like a sanctuary, a testament to every risk he'd taken, every truth he'd dared to speak. He sat at his small kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, and let the quiet settle over him. He thought about his father, who was slowly regaining his strength. They spoke every week, their conversations no longer tense and defensive, but warm, threaded with laughter and a new kind of understanding. "You sound happy," his father had said during their last call, his voice rough but proud. "I am," Ethan had replied, and it was true. Victor, ever the mentor, had become more than a guide. He was family. They met for lunch once a week, sharing stories and dreams over plates of steaming noodles. Victor's faith in him had never wavered, even when Ethan had faltered. "You're only as good as the story you're willing to tell," Victor told him one day, his eyes twinkling. Ethan had nodded, the words sinking in. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, and it had become his North Star. The exhibition had opened doors he'd never imagined. Magazines wanted his work, galleries offered residencies, and clients with big visions and deeper pockets reached out with commissions. But more than the recognition, it was the conversations that filled him with wonder. Letters from people who'd seen themselves in his images, who'd found a piece of their own story reflected back at them. "You showed me what it means to be seen," one woman had written. "Thank you for that." On the eve of a new year, Ethan was invited to speak at a small photography conference in San Francisco. Standing on that stage, with rows of faces turned up to him, he felt a rush of gratitude. He spoke of light and shadow, of vulnerability and courage. He spoke of his father, of the man he'd been, and the man he was still becoming. "Photography is more than a craft," he told them. "It's a way of listening, of saying, 'I see you. I see your story, and it matters.'" The applause that followed was a gentle wave, a hum of connection that lingered in the air. Afterward, he walked the city's hills in the cool night, his camera slung over his shoulder. The world felt alive, each street lamp a promise, each echo of laughter a prayer. He stopped by a small diner on a corner, the neon sign flickering in the dark. He ordered a coffee and watched the city outside the window, feeling the weight of the moment. How far he'd come, how much he still wanted to learn. A young woman at the counter caught his eye, her hair tangled and her eyes tired. She was sketching in a battered notebook, her pencil flying across the page like a bird. Ethan raised his camera and, with her permission, took a single shot. The gentle curve of her shoulder, the intensity in her gaze, the quiet defiance of a dreamer who refused to be silenced. Later, as he developed the photo, he thought of the way the light had caught her face, the way it had revealed something tender and true. He realized then that he would never stop searching for that light, because it was in those small, fleeting moments, in the hush of a crowded diner, in the laughter of strangers, in the whispered prayers of the city, that he found himself most alive. On the first morning of the new year, Ethan stood on the balcony of his apartment, the sun rising in a blaze of gold and pink over the skyline. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, the air crisp and bright with possibility. He knew there would still be challenges ahead, times when doubt would creep in, when the weight of expectation would feel like too much. But he also knew that he was no longer running, no longer hiding. He was here, fully, fiercely, unapologetically present. He picked up his camera and turned the lens on himself for the first time in years. He saw the quiet lines around his eyes, the shadows that told the story of every risk, every heartbreak, every moment of wonder. And he smiled, because he knew that this journey of light and darkness, of seeking and finding, was what it meant to be alive. He pressed the shutter.
Click.
And just like that, the world shifted again, endless, open, and waiting for his next frame.